I've heard stories over the years from my dad and my granddad as the history of the boat and when they got it. And I've tried to reconfirm some of that, and I did some research on it yesterday again. The boat was originally built by Barbee Shipyards in Seattle. It was on Lake Union. It was built for a gentleman that I believe was from Anacortes, and his last name was Suryan, Suryan, and they're a famous fishing family. And it was built to go to False Pass up in the Aleutians and seine up there. It was built in 1931. The boat was originally probably started in 1930, and there was two boats being built in the shipyard, and it caught fire, and the hulls were destroyed. And Rio was one of them. I don't know what the other sister ship was that was being built. So then she was rebuilt and launched in 1931. My great-grandfather bought the boat in 1935, and he was owner of a fish trap back in the heyday. And I can give you history on him, but long story short, he came from Nova Scotia in 1901 with 4 brothers, came to Alaska to fish codfish out of dories in the Bering Sea. And they worked their way south to the gold camps. My grandfather was born in the gold camps in Porcupine District outside of Haines in 1911. And then they worked their way south. My great-grandfather worked in the gold mines in Juneau at the Treadwell. He was a machinist. They moved to Tenakee, and they became hand trollers. And my granddad would fish with my great-granddad, row in the skiff for him as they were hand trollers. The story in the family is that my great-grandfather was hired with another guy to log and build a fish trap for a gentleman. And that required the use of really big logs, long trees, and a lot of work. As he and this other gentleman were being paid to build a fish trap for the guy that hired him, he logged enough trees to build one for himself. And so he built himself a fish trap and then got a permitted location for it, which is near Meyers Chuck, between Ship Island and Meyers Chuck. And my daughter found a map that had the coordinates of it, and from it was a chart that had the location of all the fish traps, and it was the F.H. Murphy Fish Company. So he operated the trap for a few years and then needed a boat to tend to the traps. So that's what the Rio was originally purchased for, was tending the traps. Of course, when the traps were outlawed at statehood, no more tending the traps. In the build-up to that, they also would use it as a towboat. And so they'd tow in the wintertime, tend the traps in the summertime, until statehood, when the traps were outlawed, then they rigged it up for seining. And so they continued to seine. And then in the 70s, my granddad and my dad were some of the pioneers for the black cod pot fishery in Southeast. Virgil Gordon was another guy at the time. Rudy Johansson was another gentleman. And between that group, they pretty much started that black cod pot fishery. And she fished black cod for quite a few years. I remember as a teenager going out on the boat and fishing black cod with them. And we'd be bringing in the wintertime, 35,000 pounds a week, pretty much steady. And then when that went limited entry, or IFQs, my dad and my granddad were partners in the operation, but all the fish tickets were in my granddad's name. So my dad did not get a permit for that, which is a shame. But so she fished black cod in the 70s. And then pretty much from then on, just strictly seining, and then some freight work. That's where Ben kind of comes in. Is my dad would haul freight for friends and stuff, and Ben has a cabin over in Chomley Sound, and pretty much everything there for the cabin was hauled over
Everything
on the Rio.
Everything went on the Rio Grande.
But he would do all kinds of freight work with it. I remember traveling up to Tenakee, haul freight up to Tenakee for family members that were up there. And Did some log salvage work with it, towing, and one of the other things he did with it, he'd retrieve broken helicopters for Kenny Eichner. Anytime they'd crash one, he'd go out and pick up the pieces.
I hope that wasn't regular work.
It actually happened more than you would want,
Oh my
but they weren't always, total wrecks. I remember one time Kenny asked us to go to Mount Edgecombe up by Sitka and pick up it was a model of helicopter that you don't see around much anymore. But it was one that Kenny had started Temsco with. It was a Hiller E model, and this one had inflatable floats on it. And they lost an engine, and the pilot was able to put it on the beach with no damage to it. And so we went up to pick it up, and we go to Sitka, and it was beautiful. It was the wintertime. We go up there, and it's a real long sandy beach, and we get there at low tide, and the helicopter's up at the high tide line. Well, Kenny had flown up in a Hughes 500, and he didn't want to wait around for the tide to come in. So we took a strap around the mast of the helicopter and hooked it up to Kenny on the 500, and he pulled as much power past red line as he could, and it was just enough to lift it up where we could push it down the beach, and then he'd have to roll off the power. And then he'd lift it up again, my dad and I would push it down the beach, lift up again, push it down the beach. Finally, we floated it out to the boat, put it on the Rio, and then came back to town for it. But the Rio has hauled a lot of broken helicopters, a lot of disabled float planes. I mean, whenever there was a problem going on where, emergency or search and rescue or something like that, he was always, first one there. Yeah, let's go. So that's pretty much the history of the boat. We retired the boat in 13 was his last season. I think 15 was the year we put it on the beach. Mm-hmm. We gave it a final resting spot out at Murphy's Landing. Yeah. Just dug a hole for it and ran it up on the beach, and there she sits.